She was supposed to kneel in the chapel that morning. She was supposed to bow her head and vow her whole life to silence and devotion. But instead, at the first light of dawn, Claire slipped barefoot down the ancient stone corridor of St. Bridget's Convent. In her trembling hand she clutched nothing more than a folded bus ticket and a prayer she had not finished whispering. She had planned this for weeks, but still she was not ready. The convent walls had been her entire world since she was a child, taken in after her mother died and her father disappeared into the hollow of addiction. Here she had learned discipline, kindness, the promise that faith could shield her from the storms waiting outside. But deep inside her chest, beneath the starch collar and soft linen habit, something restless had always stirred, a question that her vows would never silence. If God made her free, why did she feel so trapped? She passed Sister Margaret's quarters, careful not to let the old hinges creak. She paused at the chapel door, looking back just once at the golden glow of candles flickering behind the stained glass. She imagined herself there, tomorrow, kneeling in a white veil as the Mother Superior asked her to speak her final yes. But Claire did not know if she could say yes without lying to herself, without feeling like she was burying a part of her heart alive. Outside, the world smelled like rain and new earth. She pulled her coat tight around her shoulders. The bus stop was a mile down the hill, past the iron gate that had always locked behind her. For the first time it stayed open. Claire took that as her sign. By the time the bus rolled into the old coastal town, dawn had broken the sky wide open. She stepped off the last step with no plan except to run. Maybe she would find a city where no one knew her name. Maybe she would hide until the guilt stopped clawing at her ribs. She did not want to hate herself for needing to know the world before she promised to never touch it again. She found the harbor by accident. The storm was rolling in from the Atlantic, thick with salt and secrets. She stood on the dock, hair whipped around her face, wondering how far the water would take her if she just stepped forward and let it. Then a voice called behind her, offering her a ride on an old fishing boat that needed an extra hand to tie ropes. Claire lied and said she knew how to help. Hours later, waves slammed the side of the boat like fists. The old captain shouted for her to hold on. Rain blurred the world into nothing. Claire squeezed her eyes shut and prayed for forgiveness for everything she had done and all the things she still wanted to do. When the wind finally snapped the mast clean and the deck lurched sideways, Claire thought she heard her mother's voice say, "Run one more time." She let go. When Claire woke again, she was dry and warm and the world smelled like sea salt and clean linen. She lay very still, blinking at the slanted ceiling above her. There was a faint hum of a generator somewhere beyond the walls. She turned her head toward the window and saw only endless water, gray and endless and roaring against the rocks. And in that moment, Claire Quinn, runaway novice who should have been on her knees behind stone walls, realized she was lying in the bed of a stranger, on an island with no name, with no way back, and no idea yet that the man who had pulled her from the wreckage was the kind of man the world called untouchable, the kind of man who could buy silence, bury secrets, and break souls if he chose. She pressed her palm to the cold glass and whispered the only words she could find. "Please, God, do not let me disappear before I find out who I am." When Claire opened her eyes again, the sky outside the wide window had turned from storm gray to a bruised blue. She lay very still on the crisp white sheets, trying to piece together what she remembered. The last thing she knew was the thunder cracking above her head and cold water pulling her down. Now there was only warmth and the faint sound of waves crashing far below. She pushed herself upright slowly. Her head spun, but she forced her bare feet onto the polished wood floor. The room looked nothing like the convent. No crucifix on the wall, no prayer bench by the door. Instead, there were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with first editions, art that looked modern and expensive, and a desk scattered with papers in a language she could not read. She stepped to the window, pressing her forehead to the glass. The island was small from what she could see, rocky cliffs falling into white foam, then rows of dense pine trees behind the house. There were no fishing docks, no sign of neighbors. She wondered if she had died, and this was some quiet part of heaven made just for people who ask too many questions. She turned at the sound of the door opening. A man stepped inside without knocking. He moved like someone who did not need permission for anything. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled back over strong forearms, and his hair was still damp from the rain. He paused when he saw her standing there, like she might vanish if he spoke too loud. For a moment, he said nothing, just watched her with an expression so unreadable it made her heart pound. Then his voice broke the silence, smooth, low, the kind of voice that was used to commanding boardrooms and maybe entire countries. "You should be resting." Clara found her voice somewhere deep in her throat. "Where am I?" She hated how small it sounded. The man stepped closer, never looking away. "My island." His answer was so simple, so final it made her shiver. He looked older than she first thought, mid-30s maybe, handsome in a way that did not feel soft or easy. His eyes were pale gray like cold steel, and something about the set of his jaw said he was a man who did not like surprises. "You were pulled from the water after the storm. You were lucky. Most people do not wash up on these rocks and live to tell about it." Claire tried to steady her breathing. "I did not mean to be here. I was just trying to leave." His eyes narrowed. "Leave what, sister?" Claire hesitated, then swallowed. "The convent. I was supposed to take final vows this week, but I could not. So I ran." His brow lifted just slightly. "You ran from God." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She did not know how to explain that it was not God she ran from, but herself. He studied her like he was trying to peel her apart without touching her. Finally, he turned and walked to the small cabinet near the desk, poured himself a glass of water, then poured her one too. He held it out to her and waited until she stepped forward to take it. His fingers brushed hers just for a moment, and the warmth shot up her arm like an electric wire. "You should know my name if you plan to stay conscious. Damien Black." Claire blinked. The name sounded familiar, like something whispered in the news she never really heard in the convent's tiny TV room. She remembered Sister Margaret once shaking her head at a headline about billionaires who hid from taxes and built palaces no one was allowed to visit. Damien Black had been one of them. The man who disappeared from Wall Street after his wife and child died. He caught her staring, and for a second the mask slipped, just enough for her to see a flash of something raw and broken behind his eyes. He looked away first, as if it cost him something to be seen that way. "There is a guest room down the hall. Clean clothes. You will stay until the boat comes back." Claire stepped back, pressing the glass to her lips, just to have something to hold. She wanted to ask when the boat would come, if she could call someone, if she could pray in a church instead of this cold, perfect house. But none of the words came out. Damien crossed his arms, watching her again, like she was an equation he was not sure how to solve. "You are safe here, sister. For now." She wanted to correct him that she was not really a sister, not yet, maybe not ever now, but she only nodded and kept her eyes low. When he left the room, she let herself exhale. The sea slammed against the rocks far below. The island was beautiful, yes, but already she felt the walls around it closing like stone gates, no different than the ones she had just broken free from. For the first time since she climbed that convent wall, Claire wondered if she had traded one prison for another, and if this man who called this lonely island his own would ever let her leave with her soul still whole. The first night passed like a restless dream. Claire lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the storm die out beyond the heavy windows. She pulled the blanket tight under her chin, replaying every moment since she had stepped off that bus. She wondered if the sisters had found her empty cell yet. She imagined Sister Margaret whispering a prayer for her lost soul. The wind rattled the shutters, but inside the house was still and warm. Too warm for a runaway novice who had never shared a roof with a man alone. When she finally drifted off, her sleep was shallow and full of images she did not understand. In the morning, she found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee. Damien stood at the stove in another crisp shirt sleeves pushed up again, the same watch glinting on his wrist. He did not look at her as she stepped in, just pushed a mug toward her across the counter. "You should eat," he said, without lifting his eyes from the pan of eggs. "You need the strength." Claire held the mug tight, as if the heat would chase away the cold knot in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. He only nodded. They ate in silence. She stole glances at him while he read something on his phone, his thumb scrolling through news she could not see. She wondered what a man like him thought about before breakfast. He looked powerful, even here barefoot on polished floors, surrounded by expensive quiet. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Probably nothing worth noticing. She finished her coffee and stood. "I should clean this," she said, reaching for her plate, but he took it from her hand without touching her fingers this time. "I have people for that," he said simply. She frowned. "But they are not here." He glanced at her, a flash of surprise in his eyes. "No, they are not." Claire almost asked why. Why would a man like Damien Black live on an island alone, with no staff, no family, no visitors? But she bit her tongue. Some doors she was not ready to open yet. He told her there was a library at the far end of the house if she needed something to do. She found it hours later, wandered the rows of books in languages she could barely read. She picked one at random, ran her finger down the pages. Her mind would not settle. The ocean called her more than the pages did. She found the path down to the cliffs by accident, the trail hidden behind wild roses and wind-twisted pines. The sea air slapped her awake. She closed her eyes and let the wind tangle her hair. For a moment, she felt like she had outrun it all, the vows, the walls, the hush of candlelight prayers. She sat on a flat rock and pressed her palm to the cold stone, just to remind herself she was real, that she had done this, that she had chosen herself for the first time. She did not hear Damien until he was close enough for his shadow to cover hers. "You should not come here alone," he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear something sharper beneath it. "This cliff drops straight down. A wrong step and you disappear." She turned to face him, shielding her eyes from the glare. "Maybe that is what I wanted." He crouched beside her, and for the first time she noticed how tired he looked up close. His eyes were rimmed with sleepless nights. His jaw was shadowed with stubble he had not bothered to shave. "Is that what you want, sister?" he asked, low and careful. "To disappear?" Claire shook her head slowly. "No, I just want to know what it feels like to choose, for once." He studied her, the way he did in that first room, like he was trying to understand why someone so small, so quiet, could carry so much defiance in her bones. His gaze dropped to her hands folded in her lap. "You have never chosen before?" he asked. Claire thought of her mother's rosary, slipping through her fingers every night since she was 5. She thought of the whispered promises, the quiet nods, the way she said yes before she knew what no tasted like. "No," she said softly. "Not really." He nodded once, as if he understood more than he let on. "Then maybe that is why you are here." She almost laughed. "Here, on your island." He looked away out at the churning waves. "On my island, in my house, in my life." Claire frowned at the way he said it, as if he hated every part of it. "Why do you stay here?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Why not go back?" He stood slowly, towering over her shadow long in the sun. "Because there is nothing worth going back for. Not for me. Not anymore." He held out a hand to help her up. For a heartbeat, she thought of refusing, but she placed her palm in his. His grip was strong and warm. It felt dangerous to stand so close, so steady. She could see the faint scar at his hairline, the tiny fleck of silver in his dark hair, the way his eyes were too clear when they locked with hers. She pulled her hand back quickly when she was on her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned and walked back up the path without looking back. That night she lay awake again, listening for his footsteps somewhere in the halls, but they never came. Days passed like that, a rhythm of silence and unspoken questions. He left food for her in the kitchen. She cleaned the dishes even when he told her not to. She read books she did not understand just to keep her hands busy. Sometimes she found him standing at the edge of the water staring at something only he could see. He never called for her, never asked her to sit, never asked her to stay. But he did not send her away either. The storm cut them off for days. The radio crackled with reports of more bad weather. There would be no boat soon. She knew that truth, but did not say it out loud. One night she heard the echo of something like music coming from the other end of the house. She followed it barefoot through the corridor. She found Damien sitting alone in a room lined with old vinyl records. He did not notice her at first. He sat in the dark, with his head in his hands, the needle on the record spinning a soft jazz note that barely reached the door. Claire knocked lightly on the frame. He looked up, startled, then cleared his throat like he had been caught doing something he should not. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to intrude." He shook his head slowly. "You are not intruding." She stepped inside and stood by the shelves, running her finger over the dusty record spines. "Why here?" she asked quietly. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closing for a breath. "Because here I can remember her, your wife." Damien's jaw tightened, but he did not open his eyes. "Yes, and my son." He opened his eyes, then locked them on hers, and for the first time his voice cracked at the edges. "Do you still pray for them, Claire?" She stepped closer until she was standing only a foot away. "Yes, even now, even if you do not want me to." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Maybe someone should." He looked at her so raw, so unguarded that she forgot for a second that she was supposed to be afraid. She sat down on the rug near his chair, folding her knees under her. "Tell me about them," she said. "If you want to." He did. Slowly at first, like it hurt to pull the words out, but once he started, he did not stop. He told her about his wife's laugh, the way his son liked to hide under his desk, the fight that sent them out into the rain, the headlights that never saw them coming. Claire listened, hands in her lap, heart splitting open in 1,000 quiet ways. When he fell silent, she whispered the only truth she had left. "Maybe they forgave you a long time ago. Maybe you need to forgive yourself." He looked at her, and she knew that for him, forgiveness was the one thing money could never buy. He reached out then, but stopped just short of touching her cheek. His hand hovered there, suspended in the space where something new wanted to spark. Claire did not move. She did not lean in. She did not flinch. And maybe that was what kept him there with his hand open and empty between them. He dropped it slowly, resting it back on his knee. "You should sleep, sister. It is late." She stood without another word, leaving him there with the ghosts and the music. But that night, when she lay in bed, she did not pray for herself. She prayed for him, for whatever part of him was still soft enough to break. And for the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to be the one to help him heal. The next morning, the island felt different. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold hush that made the waves look softer, almost forgiving. Claire woke early and found the kitchen empty, but there was a note in Damien's sharp, precise handwriting telling her to meet him by the old greenhouse behind the main house. She wrapped herself in one of the sweaters she found in the guest closet and followed the winding path through the pines. The greenhouse was older than the rest of the property, glass panes fogged with salt and moss. She stepped inside and felt warmth wrap around her like a secret. Damien was there already, standing by a row of citrus trees in large clay pots. He looked up when she entered but did not smile. He just gestured for her to come closer. "I used to bring them here," he said quietly. Claire stepped closer until she could see the faint shape of photos pinned to the wall behind the seedlings. A woman with laughing eyes and a boy no older than 5, both frozen in moments of summer light. She studied his face when he looked at them. There was a softness there, buried under the scars. She wanted to ask if he ever talked to them when no one was listening. She wanted to ask if he ever asked their forgiveness out loud. He turned to her instead, as if reading the question. You must think I am selfish for keeping this place locked away while the world forgets them." Claire shook her head. "No, I think you are selfish for staying locked here with them when you are still alive." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something that looked like old grief rising like a tide. He stepped closer until she could feel the warmth of him, the quiet pull of something unnamed. "You know nothing about me, sister." "I know enough," she said. "I know you keep this island like a shrine. I know you sleep in a house full of ghosts. I know you want to punish yourself so no one else can." His jaw tensed, but he did not look away. "Why did you run, Claire?" She froze at the way he said her name, the way it sounded like a confession. She opened her mouth, but the words came out softer than she meant. "Because I was afraid of what? Of wasting my life pretending I was sure about something when I was not? Of kneeling for a promise I was not ready to keep? Of waking up in 40 years, wondering who I could have been if I had just let myself be lost for a little while?" She had never said it out loud before, not even to herself. It felt dangerous and freeing all at once. Damien stepped closer again, close enough for her to see the fine lines near his eyes, the faint shadow of a bruise on his knuckle where he must have slammed his fist into a wall. "Do you still believe in him?" Claire nodded slowly. "I do, but I do not know what that means anymore." He let out a low breath, and for a heartbeat it looked like he might reach for her again, but he stepped back instead, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "I have something to show you," he said. She followed him back through the garden paths down to the old boathouse she had not dared to open before. Inside, the air was thick with salt and oil. An old fishing boat was half covered by a tarp, but what caught her eye was the wall lined with maps, pins marking places all over the world. Damien flicked on a single bulb that swung from the ceiling. "I used to plan escapes," he said, his voice flat. "After they died, I thought if I ran far enough, I could outrun it all. I bought this island so I could hide until I figured out which direction would break me the least." He gestured at the maps. "But I never left." "You could have. You still can," she said. He turned to her, eyes sharp. "And you, sister, will you go back to your walls when the boat comes?" Claire looked at the floor, her hands twisting in the hem of her borrowed sweater. "I do not know," she admitted. "Maybe I should. Maybe I owe it to them." "Who is them?" "The ones who gave you that choice, or the ones who would keep you from making it?" She looked up at him, the question slicing deeper than she expected. She had not thought of it that way. She had always thought leaving made her a traitor not just to the convent, but to her mother's memory, the memory of sacrifice and soft prayers whispered over cracked hands. Damien moved closer again, and this time he did not stop himself. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. The touch was so light it made her eyes sting with something she did not have a name for. "You do not owe anyone your life, Claire, not even him." She swallowed hard, the weight of the words sinking into the soft parts of her chest. "I do not know how to live outside the walls. Then maybe you should stay here." The offer was reckless, impossible, but the way he said it did not sound like temptation. It sounded like rescue. She stepped back, needing the space to breathe. "This is not real," she said. "You do not know me. I am nothing to you." He shook his head slowly. "You are not nothing. You walked into my prison and reminded me I was still breathing. That is not nothing." She pressed a hand to her mouth, feeling the tremor that started in her ribs and spread to her fingertips. "I should go," she said. "Back to the house." Damien did not stop her. He just watched her leave, watched her cross the gravel path back to the cold, safe hallway where she could hide behind a locked door. That night the wind returned, but the rain did not. Claire sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the rosary she had carried since she was 5. The beads felt cold and foreign in her palm. She whispered half a prayer, then stopped. The words caught in her throat, stuck behind the memory of his eyes when he said, "Stay." She did not sleep. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the faint light in the boathouse flicker on and off. She wondered, if he was still planning his escape even now that she was here. If maybe he was hoping she would give him a reason not to run. When the dawn came, gray and soft, she made her way down the hallway. She found him by the kitchen window, staring at the sea, a mug of black coffee in his hand. He looked at her over his shoulder as if he had known she would come. "I called for the boat," he said. Claire's heart lurched. "You did?" He nodded once. "It will come tomorrow if the weather holds. You will be free to go wherever you want." She stepped closer, arms crossed tight to stop her hands from shaking. "And you?" He did not answer right away. He looked back at the waves, then back at her. "Maybe I will leave too. Or maybe I will stay until the walls finish what they started." His voice was so calm, but she could feel the storm beneath it, the same storm she carried in her own ribs. She took the mug from his hand gently, their fingers brushing, just enough to make the air shift. "Maybe you should let them go," she said. "The ghosts, the walls." He looked at her so long she thought he might say something that would break them both. Instead, he just nodded, once, slow, deliberate, as if he was making a promise to himself more than to her. When she turned to leave, he caught her wrist, not hard, just enough to anchor her in place. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me that I am still alive." Claire felt her throat tighten. She did not know what to do with the way he looked at her, like she was both danger and salvation. So she just nodded and pulled her hand away gently. That night she lay awake again, but this time the silence did not feel so heavy. She wondered what tomorrow would look like when the boat came. If she would step on it, or if she would watch him disappear instead. She wondered if she was ready to stop running, not just from the convent, but from herself. And somewhere in the restless spaces between thought and dream, she wondered what it would feel like to let him stay close enough, to break the last pieces of her open, and maybe build something honest from the ruins they both carried. The morning the boat was supposed to come, the air felt too still, as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would leave and who would stay behind. Claire stood at the edge of the small dock Damien had shown her the night before, her thin sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. The sea was deceptively calm, waves folding in and out like slow breaths. She could hear him behind her before she saw him, the crunch of gravel under boots that did not belong to a billionaire hiding from the world, but to a man walking toward a choice he could not name. She did not turn around when he stopped beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both watching the horizon where a gray smudge might be the boat or just another promise that would never come. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice quiet but heavy with everything they had not said. Claire shook her head. "No, but I think I have to be." He let out a low laugh, humorless, but not cruel. "Do you want to go back to them?" he asked. "To the ones who told you who you were supposed to be?" She turned then, facing him, her hair whipping across her face in the salt wind. "I do not want to go back, but I do not know how to go forward either. I do not know how to be this person who runs away." He looked at her like she was telling him his own story back to him. "Maybe you are not running," he said. "Maybe you're just walking towards something you were never allowed to see." She wanted to believe that more than she wanted to believe any scripture she had whispered into cold pillows at dawn. She looked at him, really looked at him, the faint scars, the tired eyes, the way his hands curled and uncurled at his sides, like he could not decide whether to hold her or let her go. "What will you do?" she asked him. "When I leave." His mouth twitched like he almost smiled, but could not quite find the shape of it. "Maybe I will leave too," he said. "Or maybe I will finally stay long enough to see what I buried here." Claire felt something sharp twist in her chest. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes darkened with something that was not possession but longing stripped of pretense. "I want you to do whatever will set you free," he said, "even if that means you leave me here with my ghosts." The wind picked up, making her shiver, but she did not step back. She wanted him to close the space between them, to do the one thing they had both pretended they did not think about when the nights grew too quiet to lie to themselves. But he did not move. He just looked at her with that raw, unguarded pain that told her no one had ever stayed long enough to love what was left behind. Claire reached out first, fingertips brushing the back of his hand, the touch so small, yet it made the whole world tilt. "Do you believe in miracles, Damien?" she asked. He let out a shaky breath, the hint of a laugh breaking through the tight line of his jaw. "I used to," he said, "before they died. Before I learned that money can build you castles, but it cannot save you when your heart wants to drown." She swallowed hard, her pulse thundering in her ears, louder than the waves. "Maybe this is one," she whispered. "Maybe we are." For a second she thought he would pull away, but instead he caught her hand in his large, warm grip, like he was afraid she might vanish if he did not hold on. "Claire," he murmured her name, tasting like a promise he was not sure he deserved. The boat's horn echoed across the water, cutting through the fragile silence they had built around themselves. They both turned, watching the small white speck inch closer to the dock. It looked harmless, a passage to freedom that suddenly felt like exile. Claire pulled her hand from his and stepped back. "I should go," she said, but her voice shook with a truth she did not want to admit. He nodded, his throat working around words he did not know how to speak. "You should." She turned then, but before she could take another step, he caught her wrist again, his fingers gentle but unyielding. "I cannot give you faith," he said, his voice low and rough. "I cannot promise you a forever. I do not even know if I believe in tomorrow, but if you stay, I swear I will try to build something honest from what is left of me." Her eyes burned, but she did not let the tears fall. She wanted to say yes, wanted to say stay, wanted to say save me, but all she managed was a whisper. "I am not here to save you, Damien." He laughed, soft and broken. "I know. Maybe you are here to save yourself." The boat docked its engine, humming like a question they both could not answer. The captain did not step off, just waved once, bored and impatient. Claire looked at the boat, then back at the man who had somehow become the only anchor she trusted more than the walls she had left behind. "I do not know how to do this," she confessed. "Neither do I," he said. "But maybe that is the point." She took one step toward the boat, then stopped. Her breath caught as the cold wind pushed at her back, urging her to move, to choose to run again. She turned slowly, facing him, the tears finally breaking free. "What if I am making a mistake?" she asked. He stepped closer, their foreheads almost touching, his breath warm in the salt air. "Then we make it together," he said. The boat horn sounded again, sharp and impatient. Claire turned again, watching the captain toss a rope onto the dock. She could step forward, she could walk away, she could climb back into a world that would tell her who to be, how to pray, what to sacrifice, or she could turn and stay on this island with a man who was as lost and broken as she was. A man who did not promise salvation, but offered something that tasted dangerously close to grace. She closed her eyes, drew in a breath that tasted like salt and new beginnings. When she opened them, she saw him not as a billionaire, not as a ghost keeper, but as a man waiting for someone to choose him back. Slowly she stepped away from the boat, her feet crunching gravel as she closed the space between them. The captain called out, but she did not answer. Damien watched her every step, his eyes wide, as if he did not believe she would really do it, until her hands pressed flat against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "I do not know what happens now," she said, her voice cracking around the truth. He smiled then, small and real and almost shy. "Neither do I, Claire. But maybe we find out together." The boat engine roared behind them, a reminder of all the worlds they were leaving behind. Claire turned her head just enough to see it drift away without her. The sea swallowed its wake, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel guilty for not going back. She looked at Damien, at the island, at the sharp, uncertain edges of the life waiting in front of them, and when he bent his forehead to hers, she let herself believe that maybe the miracle was not that she had run, but that she had found something worth staying for. In the days after the boat left without her, the island seemed to shift around Claire and Damien like it was waking up after a long sleep. They settled into something that was not quite routine, but not chaos either. She moved through the house barefoot, her hair loose, her laughter low and shy but growing louder each day. He watched her from doorways and windows, sometimes from the shadows of his old ghosts that seemed to shrink in her presence. It should have felt like freedom, but somewhere deep under the softness a new fear began to bloom in Claire's chest. It started small, an ache she could not name when she woke in the middle of the night and found him staring at the ceiling, eyes open and unblinking, as if sleep was an indulgence he no longer trusted. One night she sat up and whispered, "What are you thinking about?" But he only shook his head, pulled her close and buried his face in her hair. She wanted to believe it was enough to hold him together, but she knew better than to trust silence. One morning, as the pale sun broke over the horizon, Claire found the old envelope on the kitchen table. It was yellowed, sealed with wax that had cracked from years of being moved but never opened. She touched it gently, as if it might crumble beneath her fingers. Damien walked in, barefoot, hair a mess from sleep or nightmares or both. He saw where her eyes had landed, and for a moment, something in his face closed like a door slamming shut. "What is it?" she asked softly. He sat down across from her, his hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. "It is the last letter she ever wrote me," he said, his voice flat, almost empty. "My wife." Claire felt her breath catch. "You never opened it." He shook his head. "I could not. I thought if I did it would make it real, that she was gone, that I had failed her, that forgiveness was something she never gave me." Claire reached across the table, laying her hand on his. "Maybe it is not forgiveness you are afraid of. Maybe it is that she did forgive you and you do not know what to do with it." He looked at her like she had cracked him open with words alone. "Read it," she said. "With me here." He pulled his hand away then, not cruelly, but like he needed space to breathe. Instead, he stood and walked out to the old greenhouse. She found him there an hour later, sitting on the cold stone floor, the letter still unopened in his lap. She knelt beside him, taking his hand again, feeling the tremor in his fingers. Damien opened the envelope with careful, deliberate movements. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her handwriting small and neat. As he read, his shoulders shook once, then again, until the silent grief became a sound. A raw, quiet thing that made Claire press her forehead to his arm, whispering, "It is all right. It is all right. It is all right," over and over like a prayer. She finally understood. When he finished, he handed it to her without a word. Claire read the letter, her own breath catching on each line. The words were simple, not blame, not anger, but love, so clear and soft it felt like a blessing. "I hope you find peace. I hope you forgive yourself. I hope someday someone will remind you how to live." Claire folded the letter back into his hand. She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the broken edges, but also the man who had held her steady when she wanted to run. She kissed his temple, soft as rain. She wanted to say, "I am here, I will stay," but the words stuck behind her ribs. That night, as they lay tangled together in the dark, Claire whispered, "I want to tell you something," and he hummed a quiet reply, his hand tracing slow circles on her hip. "I think I am falling in love with you." She said the words so small they barely reached the air between them. His hand stilled, his breath caught, but he did not pull away. "I do not know how to love you back yet," he said honestly, voice rough with truth, "but I want to learn." Her eyes burned, but she smiled, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. "That is enough for now," she whispered. In the days that followed, the world seemed softer, more fragile, but for the first time in her life, that did not scare her. One evening, a storm rolled in, sudden and violent, lightning cracking over the ocean like a warning. They sat by the fireplace, candles flickering shadows across the walls. Damien stared into the flames, his fingers threaded through hers. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked. Claire tilted her head. "To the convent?" He nodded. "Sometimes," she said. Not because I want to, but because I wonder who I would be if I did. And do you think you would be happier? She shook her head. No, but maybe I would be safer. He squeezed her hand tighter. I do not want you safe, he said. I want you real. She turned to him, her heart aching with the weight of what they were building. And what about you, Damien? What do you want to be, now that you are not hiding behind grief? He looked at her eyes, dark and sure. I want to be the man you see when you look at me. The storm rattled the windows, but inside the room there was only warmth, the kind that did not need vows or prayers to feel holy. Later that night, as thunder rolled over the island, Claire woke to find him gone. Panic scraped at her chest, but she found him outside, standing in the rain, barefoot, head tilted to the sky. She stepped out into the cold, wet night, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. He did not flinch, did not turn, just laid his hands over hers. I thought if I stood here long enough, she would forgive me, he murmured. Claire pressed her cheek to his back. Maybe she already has. Maybe you have to forgive yourself now. He turned slowly, rain dripping from his lashes, his hands cradling her face. Claire, he whispered. And for the first time he kissed her like a promise. Not rushed, not desperate, but slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing the taste of something he never thought he deserved. She kissed him back, not as a novice, not as someone fleeing her old life, but as the woman she was becoming, piece by piece in his arms. The storm raged, but they did not notice. They stayed there under the rain, their breath warm against each other's skin. The island holding its breath, as if waiting for the moment. The past finally let them go. When the storm finally gave way to dawn, the island looked washed clean, like it had been holding its own breath for years, and only now remembered how to exhale. Claire sat on the porch steps, her knees pulled to her chest, her damp hair twisted into a loose braid that Damien had clumsily helped her fix before sunrise. He stood behind her, coffee in hand, watching the sea stretch out in endless gray-blue ribbons. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to hide behind. No more ghosts to worship in secret, no more prayers whispered to a ceiling that never answered back. She felt his warmth behind her, a steady, silent promise that maybe some truths did not need to be spoken out loud to be real. Claire thought about the girl she was before the island, the one who clutched her rosary so tightly her palms stayed marked with tiny bruises, the one who had run because staying felt like drowning. She thought about the woman she was now, not saved, not perfect, but alive in a way that felt raw and terrifying and holy all at once. Damien stepped down beside her, settling on the step so their shoulders touched. He did not try to fix her hair or wrap an arm around her like a savior. He just sat there, quiet, steady, the way a man who had learned that some things were worth waiting for always did. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "Now," he said, his eyes on the horizon, "now we build something that does not need walls or locks or guilt." She looked at him, saw the man who had once built a fortress of grief and called it home, and now sat beside her, barefoot, wide open as if daring the world to come for him. "I do not know how," she admitted. He smiled that small, soft, almost shy smile she had come to crave more than any hymp. "Neither do I, but maybe that is the point." She let herself lean into him, just enough to feel his breath at her temple, the quiet, steady thrum of a heart that had learned to beat again because she had dared to stay. The sun slipped higher, spilling pale gold across the deck. Somewhere deep inside, Claire felt something loosen, like a final knot untied. She knew the world would not forgive them easily, that somewhere a chapel bell would ring without her, that whispers would echo about the novice who ran and the billionaire who let her stay. But here on this island, none of that mattered, because here love was not a sin or a scandal or a promise to be broken. Here love was a choice, made again and again each morning when they woke to the hush of waves and the slow, steady certainty that freedom was not in the running but in the staying. Damien pressed his lips to her temple, and she closed her eyes just for a moment, letting the warmth sink all the way in. Maybe someday they would leave the island, find another place to build a life with less salt in the air and fewer ghosts in the walls, but for now this was enough. Enough to know she could love without shame, enough to know he could be forgiven by living. Enough to know that faith did not have to be a vow whispered to a distant heaven, but something built here, in the soft, fragile spaces between two hearts, choosing each other. She opened her eyes, felt the sun on her skin, and let herself believe that maybe some stories did not need saints or martyrs to feel like salvation. Maybe some stories just needed two people brave enough to stand still long enough for love to grow roots. She turned to him, her voice soft but sure. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" He did not look away, did not flinch, did not promise forever. He just nodded once and whispered, "Yes." And in that small, simple word, Claire found her answer, not in a chapel, not in a scripture, but here in this imperfect man on this quiet island, where faith and love finally met and made something worth staying for.